It's the story of a submarine lost in World War II with a unique connection to Milwaukee, and also how new images from deep underwater are keeping the sub's legacy alive.
May 7, 1945, German submarine U-3523 slipped out of Kiel Harbor in northern Germany. She was one of the most advanced submarines ever built. 57 men were aboard. The war was ending. Germany was collapsing. But U-3523 had orders to sail anyway. She never reached her destination. She simply vanished into the North Atlantic. No distress signal, no wreckage found. For 79 years, nobody knew what happened to her. Then, in August 2024, a research vessel scanning the seafloor off the coast of Denmark found something. A submarine, intact, sitting upright in 400 feet of water. When an underwater drone finally entered the wreck last month, the cameras captured something that made the operators immediately shut down the live stream. The submarine isn't empty. The crew is still there. All 57 of them, still at their stations, still in their bunks, still in the control room with their hands on the controls. And the evidence inside proves they didn't die when the submarine sank. They died days later, trapped in total darkness, as the oxygen slowly ran out. By 1945, Allied forces had decimated the German submarine fleet. Older U-boats were slow, vulnerable, and easy to hunt. Germany needed something revolutionary. This submarine, called Type XXY, was that revolution. She could travel at 17 knots submerged, faster than most surface ships. She had a streamlined hull designed for underwater speed. She carried advanced sonar and hydraulic torpedo loading systems. Most importantly, she had massive battery capacity that allowed her to stay submerged for weeks without surfacing. If Germany had deployed Type 21 U-boats earlier in the war, the Battle of the Atlantic might have gone differently. But by the time production ramped up in late 1944, it was too late. Germany was losing. The Allied invasion of Europe was succeeding. Time was running out. U-3523 was commissioned on September 16, 1944, at the Blom und Voss shipyard in Hamburg. Kapitänleutnant Karl Neuerberg took command. The crew was experienced, veterans of previous patrols. They trained through the fall and winter, learning the new technology, preparing for what everyone knew would likely be a suicide mission. By May 1945, the situation was desperate. Soviet forces were entering Berlin. American and British forces were sweeping across Germany. The war was over in everything but name. But Admiral Karl Dönitz, now head of the German government after Hitler's suicide, continued to issue orders. Some U-boats were told to surrender, others received different instructions. U-3523 received orders on May 6, 1945. She was to sail immediately to Norway. Some historians believe she was carrying high-ranking Nazi officials trying to escape. Others think she was transporting documents or gold. The truth is, nobody knows for certain. Her mission was classified. Her cargo was unknown. What is known is that U-3523 departed Kiel on May 7, 1945. Germany surrendered on May 8. U-3523 never received the surrender order, or if she did, she ignored it. She sailed north into the Skagerrak, the strait between Denmark and Norway. This was one of the most heavily mined areas in European waters. Allied forces had laid thousands of mines to prevent German ships from escaping. U-3523 was running submerged, using her advanced sonar to navigate through the minefields. Sometime in the week following May 7th, something went catastrophically wrong. For 79 years, U-3523 was listed as missing. German naval records showed she departed Kiel but never arrived in Norway. Allied records showed no attacks on submarines in that area during that time period. She hadn't been depth charged. She hadn't been torpedoed. She had simply disappeared. Theories multiplied. Some believed she had been scuttled deliberately, her crew escaping in Norway. Others thought she had defected to South America with Nazi gold. Conspiracy theories claimed she had reached Argentina or even Antarctica. The truth was simpler and far more horrible. She had struck a mine and sunk. Her crew had died the slowest death imaginable. In July 2024, a Danish research vessel was conducting a routine survey of the Skagerrak seafloor. The area is notorious for shipwrecks. Hundreds of vessels sank there during both world wars. The survey was mapping the wrecks for historical documentation. On July 22nd, the side-scan sonar detected an anomaly, a large cylindrical object lying on the seafloor at 410 feet. The sonar image showed a submarine, intact, with no visible external damage. The research team consulted naval archives. Based on the location and the submarine's configuration, they tentatively identified it as U-3523. If confirmed, this would be one of only a handful of Type WWII U-boats ever found intact. On August 15, 2024, they deployed a remotely operated vehicle to investigate. The ROV descended through the murky North Atlantic water. Visibility was poor, maybe 10 feet, but the submarine's outline emerged from the darkness. She sits upright on the seafloor, bow pointed north. The hull is intact. The conning tower is recognizable despite decades of marine growth. The deck gun is still mounted. Torpedo tube doors are closed. There's no sign of explosion damage, no gaping holes, no torn metal. Whatever happened to U-3523, it wasn't violent, at least not externally. The ROV moved along the starboard side. The hull number, U-3523, was still faintly visible beneath layers of rust and sediment. This confirmed the identification. They had found her. But finding the submarine was just the beginning. The real discovery came when they looked inside. Type WWII. U-boats had external access hatches that could be opened remotely in case of emergency. These hatches were designed to allow trapped crew to escape if the submarine sank in shallow water. At 410 feet, escape would have been impossible. But the hatches were there. One hatch on the aft section was partially open, not fully open, just a few inches, enough for the ROV to maneuver a camera inside. The operators watched their screens as the camera entered the submarine. The first compartment was the aft torpedo room. Racks for spare torpedoes lined the walls, bunks for crew members folded against the bulkheads, and everywhere, personal belongings, uniforms hanging from hooks, boots lined up below the bunks, photographs pinned to the walls, letters, books, a harmonica resting on a shelf. The crew had left everything exactly where it was, because they never left. The camera moved forward through the pressure door into the engine room. This was where the twin diesel engines and massive electric motors were housed. The machinery was still intact, frozen in place by decades of cold water, and beside the engines, a body. The camera didn't linger. The research team had strict protocols about filming human remains. But there was no question. A German sailor, still in his uniform, lying where he had fallen 79 years ago. The cold water and depth had preserved him, not perfectly, but enough to be recognizable. The ROV continued forward. It entered the crew quarters. More bunks, more personal items, and more bodies. The operators counted at least 6 in this section alone, all still in uniform, all still at their positions or in their bunks. These men hadn't died in an explosion. They hadn't drowned instantly. They were lying peacefully, as if they had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. If you're following this story, hit subscribe now. What the drone found in the control room will change everything you thought you knew about how submarines die. The ROV maneuvered through the narrow passageway toward the control room. This was the heart of the submarine, where the captain and officers commanded the boat, where diving planes were controlled, where periscopes were operated, where navigation was plotted. The camera entered the compartment. The scene was frozen in time. Control wheels were still in place. Depth gauges were visible behind glass. Charts were spread on the navigation table, and at the controls, men. 3 bodies in the control room, one at the diving plane controls, one at the navigation station, one sitting in what appeared to be the captain's position, all still at their posts, all still in uniform, all preserved by the cold Atlantic water. The operators reviewing the footage could reconstruct what happened. These men had been alive when the submarine reached the bottom. They had been conscious. They had been at their stations trying to save the ship. The evidence was everywhere. The diving plane controls were in the full rise position. Someone had been trying to surface the submarine. The ballast controls showed attempts to blow the tanks. Someone had been trying to achieve positive buoyancy. It hadn't worked. Something had failed. The submarine had continued to sink. And once it reached 410 feet, the pressure made escape impossible. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what the cameras found in the forward compartments. The ROV moved into the forward torpedo room. This was the largest open space in the submarine, where spare torpedoes were stored and where off-duty crew members slept. The cameras showed bunks, equipment lockers, torpedo racks, and bodies. At least 20 of them. They weren't at their stations. They were clustered in one corner of the compartment, huddled together. The camera operators realized what they were seeing. These men had gathered in this space because it was the largest, because it had the most air. They were trying to conserve oxygen. On one bulkhead, scratch marks, deep gouges in the paint. Someone had been clawing at the walls. Near the forward hatch, more marks. Someone had been trying to open the hatch from the inside. It hadn't worked. The hatch was designed to withstand external pressure. From inside, at 410 feet depth, it would be impossible to open. The pressure differential was too great. They would have needed hydraulic assistance, but the hydraulics had failed when the submarine flooded. The men in the forward torpedo room had been trapped. They knew they were trapped, and they had died slowly as the oxygen ran out. The research team consulted with submarine experts and forensic analysts. Based on the evidence, they reconstructed U-3523's final hours. The submarine had struck a mine. The explosion had been external, below the hull near the control room. The mine had been one of thousands laid by Allied forces in the Skagerrak. The explosion hadn't breached the pressure hull immediately, but it had damaged the ballast tank system and knocked out the hydraulics. The submarine began taking on water through the damaged ballast tanks. Captain Lieutenant Neuerberg would have attempted to surface immediately. He would have tried to blow the main ballast with compressed air. But the hydraulic controls were damaged. The valves wouldn't open properly. The submarine continued to sink. As it went deeper, water pressure increased. Small leaks became larger. Bulkhead seals that were designed for specific depths began to fail. Water entered the boat. The crew would have attempted to surface using emergency procedures. They would have tried manual controls. They would have tried everything. But a Type WWII U-boat weighs over 800 tons. Once it starts sinking with damaged ballast systems, there's no stopping it. U-3523 reached the seafloor at 410 feet depth. The impact would have been relatively gentle. The submarine was designed to withstand pressure at that depth. The hull didn't breach. The compartments didn't flood catastrophically, but they did flood slowly. Small leaks around damaged seals, water entering through the mine damage. Centimeter by centimeter, the water level rose inside the boat. The crew would have sealed themselves in the forward compartments where the flooding was slowest. They would have closed the pressure doors behind them. They would have rationed the air. They would have waited for rescue that would never come. In a sealed submarine at that depth, the air supply depends on the volume of the compartments and the number of men breathing. With 57 men, the air would have lasted maybe 48 hours. Perhaps 72 hours if they stayed calm and minimized physical activity. But carbon dioxide buildup would have become toxic long before the oxygen ran out. Headaches, nausea, confusion, eventually unconsciousness. Death would have come as they simply fell asleep and never woke up. The men at their stations in the control room had probably died first, within the first day. They had been trying to save the boat, working physically, breathing heavily. The carbon dioxide would have overcome them quickly. The men in the forward torpedo room, huddled together, staying still, breathing slowly, had lasted longer. Maybe 3 days, maybe 4. Long enough to realize no rescue was coming. Long enough to understand they were going to die. Long enough to claw at the walls in desperation. The scratch marks on the bulkheads tell the story. As the air grew toxic and men began to lose consciousness, some panicked. They tried to escape. They clawed at the steel with their bare hands. They tried to open hatches that couldn't be opened. And then they died. All 57 of them. Some peacefully in their sleep, others in panic and terror, but all of them knowing exactly what was happening. All of them aware that death was coming slowly and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The discovery of U-3523 created immediate ethical questions. The submarine is a war grave. Under international maritime law, military shipwrecks are protected. The remains of crew members must be treated with respect, regardless of which side they fought on. Germany requested that the wreck be left undisturbed. The families of the crew members, those who could still be located, asked that their relatives rest in peace. The research team agreed. The survey would be documentary only. No artifacts would be removed. No bodies would be disturbed. But the footage had already been captured, and that footage showed something deeply disturbing. Not just bodies, but evidence of how those men died. The scratch marks, the huddled positions, the desperation. Some argued the footage should never be released. The families shouldn't have to see their relatives like that. The men deserved dignity in death. Others argued that history demands documentation. War isn't abstract. Men die in submarines. They die slowly. They die in terror. If we don't show the reality, we risk sanitizing it. We risk making war seem cleaner than it is. The research team consulted with historians, ethicists, and the families. They decided to release limited footage with all images of human remains removed. The documentary would describe what was found, but not show it directly. The full uncensored footage would be archived for historical research, but not made public. The compromise satisfied few people completely, but it acknowledged competing concerns, the historical value of documentation versus the dignity owed to the dead. U-3523 lies 410 feet down in the Skagerrak. She's been there for 79 years. She'll be there for centuries more. The cold water at that depth preserves everything. The bodies, the equipment, the evidence of those final hours. The submarine is corroding slowly. Eventually, the hull will breach. Water will flood the remaining sealed compartments. The bodies will be exposed to currents and marine life. Nature will take what humans have agreed to leave alone. But for now, U-3523 is a time capsule. A frozen moment from May 1945 when 57 men realized they were trapped and going to die. When they tried to save themselves, when they failed, when they gathered together in the dark and waited for the end. They were German sailors. They served Nazi Germany. But they were also men. They had families. They had lives before the war. They didn't choose to die slowly in a flooded submarine. They were following orders. They were doing their duty. And they died one of the worst deaths imaginable. The discovery of U-3523 answers a 79-year-old mystery. It confirms what happened to the submarine. It shows where 57 men died. But it also raises questions that have no good answers. Why did Neuerberg follow orders to sail on May 7th when the war was clearly lost? Why didn't he surrender when Germany capitulated on May 8th? What was U-3523 carrying that was important enough to risk 57 lives? The submarine's cargo remains unknown. If there were documents or valuables aboard, they're still there, sealed in the compartments, unreachable. The families have asked that the wreck remain undisturbed, which means those questions may never be answered. 410 feet down in the cold, North Atlantic, U-3523 holds her dead. 57 men who sailed into a minefield and never came home, who struck a mine and sank slowly, who sealed themselves in the forward compartments and waited 3 days to die. The scratch marks are still visible on the bulkheads. The bodies are still huddled in the corner. The diving plane controls are still in the full rise position where someone left them 79 years ago, still trying to save a ship that couldn't be saved. That's war. Not the glory, not the strategy, the reality. Men clawing at steel, men dying slowly in the dark, men who knew death was coming and couldn't stop it. The cameras captured it all. The evidence is documented. And now we have to decide what to do with that knowledge. Subscribe if this story impacted you. History isn't clean, and these men deserve to be remembered for how they died.